This is the story of a little girl everyone believed was lost in darkness, and the janitor who discovered a light no one else could see. Stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. He wasn't begging, he was bargaining. "I'm not here for a handout," Martin Keller said, voice steady the way a bridge holds even when the river rages. "Give me one shift. If I don't earn it, I walk." The receptionist's fingers hovered above the mouse, caught somewhere between protocol and the uncomfortable realization that this man in a frayed jacket carried himself like he used to sign discharge papers, not mop buckets. The badge they finally printed read "Temp Facilities," the kind that opens a few doors and tells everyone else to ignore your face. Martin studied the cart like a medic checks a trauma kit. Handle, wheels, buckets, dilution ratios. Old habits. He didn't smile when they waved him toward the elevators. He just nodded, tucked the badge under the jacket, and thought about the little note in his pocket that said "rent due in 3 days" underlined twice. On the quiet floor where executives breathed in glass and exhaled silence, everything had an expensive kind of emptiness. Chairs sat at exact angles. A plant leaf had been cut where it brown-tipped, the stem trimmed clean like a surgical line. The stillness wasn't peaceful, it was pressurized. You could feel it in your ribs. Martin rolled the cart past a wall of glass and nearly missed the shape tucked near the far window. A small girl, legs folded, a stuffed fox crushed against her chest. She didn't flinch at the squeak of a wheel or the soft slap of the mop in clean arcs. Her eyes were open, but unfocused, as if they'd chosen a horizon no one else could see. He would have kept moving, would have filed the site under "Not My Business," if not for the beam of morning light that skimmed across polished stone and broke at his mop handle into a pale ribbon that reached the girl's cheek. Her lashes trembled. The subtle turn of her head was the kind you only notice if you've spent nights watching monitors blink over a hospital bed. He changed nothing in his posture, only the angle of his wrist as he rinsed and wrung. The light slid away. She stilled. He lifted. The ribbon returned. Her fingers tightened around the fox. A coincidence can happen once. Twice is a pattern trying to breathe. Through the reflection, another figure appeared, a woman with a phone in her hand, the kind of presence that edits rooms simply by standing in them. Her suit said she commanded budgets. Her eyes said she'd outrun sleep. She watched Martin the way hawks watch field mice, curious only to decide if they belong. He didn't look back. He shifted the wet floor sign yellow instead of gray into the spill of light. The girl tracked the color with that same near-invisible pull, like a tide you only feel in your ankles. Martin's chest tightened, memory flashing like an afterimage, a child squinting at a sunrise through slatted blinds, and a promise he couldn't keep. "You don't belong on this level." The woman's voice clipped the air. Martin turned, measured. "Got routed here by mistake. I'm just finishing." She held his gaze the way board votes hold careers. "You looked at my daughter." He glanced past her without moving his head. "I looked at the light. A beat. She's blind." The woman said, each consonant polished. "Then the light's playing tricks on both of us." He answered, not combative, just the simple edge of a man who refuses to lie to himself. He pushed the cart toward the door, but paused as a whisper thinned the distance, so soft it could have been the building's breath. "Yellow." He didn't look back. He couldn't. Some truths bruise if you touch them too soon. The door sighed shut behind him, and the pressure he'd felt in his ribs followed him into the stairwell like a question with teeth. They gave him rules the next day, the kind that pretend to be about safety but are really about control. No direct interaction with the protected resident. No noise beyond operational thresholds. Maintain visual neutrality when on executive floors. Sign here. Initial there. He wrote his name like he was signing a ceasefire with himself. He didn't come to break rules. But he had once watched a little girl's world narrow to a single LED pulse, and the sound a monitor makes when it stops telling you the truth never leaves your blood. So he watched, and he counted. The blinds adjusted with the sun every hour. The reflections moved like migrating birds. Each time the yellow sign caught a shard of light, the girl's mouth twitched. Each time he switched the dull bin for the bright one, her hand drifted that direction as if a thread tugged from somewhere she couldn't name. In the closet that smelled of lemon and steel, Martin kept a small notebook taped to the inside of the door. He wrote simple, precise lines. 09:40, head tilt with reflection. 11:05, fingers flex to color field. 13:22, blink to moving beam. 3 words circled hard enough to dent the page, not total blindness. By the weeks in, the building had mapped itself into his muscles. He could feel cameras' blind angles and hear the difference between an elevator stopping and a security guard deciding. That night, after most of the rhythms went home and left their echoes in the halls, Martin stood outside the glass room, just inside the boundary where his badge would not complain. He did not speak. He did not wave. He eased a small inspection light from his sleeve, the kind used to read model numbers in dark machinery, set it to a low amber, and let it paint a thin stripe along the floor, not at her, but near, brushing the edge of her world. The stripe paused. The girl's head turned fractional, deliberate. The fox slipped a little in her grip as if it, too, felt the pull. "Sophie," a voice said behind him, and he knew before he turned that it belonged to the woman in the suit. "Bedtime." She moved past him without granting him a glance. The girl's lips parted. Air moved. A syllable formed and died. The mother's hand lifted toward a lamp switch. "Don't," Martin said, too quick, too honest. The room held its breath. The lamp stayed on. And Sophie, eyes catching just the edge of amber, shaped a word so fragile it seemed afraid of its own sound. The mother didn't hear it. Martin did. He heard it the way a diver hears the first pop of returning to the surface. Light. They handed Martin a laminated sheet with the kind of rules that sound reasonable until you measure their shape against a child's silence. Maintain distance, no direct communication with family members, no non-essential equipment on executive levels. Report anomalies to security, not to medical, not to HR, definitely not to the mother. He initialed each line like a man laying down sandbags against a river he knew would rise anyway. Word spread the way it always does in buildings like this, through vents, through glances, through coffee poured a little too slowly. "Boss's kid," the night porter muttered, as if that 2-word spell could explain a girl sitting alone in a glass room while adults arranged the furniture around her. Martin said nothing. He pushed the cart and listened, to the hum of air handlers, to the whisper of motorized blinds, to the way Sophie's breath quickened whenever the room tipped from gray to gold. He made his tests small enough to be deniable. He swapped the matte trash bin for one with a reflective band. He angled the wet floor placard so its yellow mouth bit a sliver of light. He polished a stainless handle into a thin crescent mirror. Each time, the same quiet tremor. A blink held too long. A tiny tilt. The fox's ear crushed tighter. Not proof, yet just a pattern insisting it existed. Elena's heart moved through hallways as if doors anticipated her. The way people straightened when she approached belonged to someone who had spent years teaching rooms how to behave. She'd built her name on solving impossible problems with clean, expensive certainty. But certainty has a sound when it cracks, a dark china note only the person holding it can hear. She lingered more often just beyond the glass, phone lowered, eyes not on the dashboards but on the girl who would not meet her gaze, and yet flinched when light shifted. "We're not doing this again," Elena told herself under her breath, like a vow made to no one. Years ago, there had been a neurologist with a reassuring tie and a vocabulary that made doubt feel unsophisticated. Congenital, permanent, irreversible, words that slam gates quietly. Now a janitor with a careful walk was putting splinters in those gates simply by noticing. Elena watched Martin wipe a table near Sophie without ever once looking at the child. The lamp he left on was a fraction warmer than the overheads. The fox tucked tighter. She told herself it was coincidence, that he was manipulating her with optics. But that night, in the sudden stillness after everyone else slept, she stood over a small amber bottle on her vanity and wondered why the label's comfort had grown so thin. Martin slept badly, the kind of shallow, tilting rest where memory edits itself into the present. He woke twice with his hand reaching for a monitor that wasn't there, and the echo of a name. He said less and less out loud, "Maya." By morning, he had made a decision that felt both reckless and like the only decent thing remaining. He would not speak to Sophie. He would not speak to Elena. He would speak to light. In his locker, he taped a fresh page under the log observational protocol 0.1 and listed what he could do without breaking the letter of a rule. Set lamps to warm tone, reduce overhead glare, roll a rubber ball through a sun patch during routine floor checks, let an amber pin-like glance along the baseboard exactly where Sophie's peripheral might catch motion without hearing sound. He timed his passes to the blind's rhythm. He paced himself so cameras would record nothing stranger than good custodial practice. And still, the room felt like it was tipping toward a moment that didn't care about his planning. On Thursday, a brief power conditioning hiccup lights dimmed. Emergency strips glowed rolled through the building like a held breath. In that beat of almost dark, the fox slipped from Sophie's arms and thumped the rug. She started, turned toward the glow line, and barely, blessedly reached. Security noticed. Of course they did. Systems built on control always notice when a human being decides to improvise. 2 polite questions became a badge, skin became a note in a file that would later be called concerns. You keep showing up on 40, the taller guard said, friendly the way a locked door is friendly. Martin shrugged. Marble needs deionized water, or it clouds. The guard smiled like he'd just learned a fact he could use later. Stay in your lanes, Keller. He did on paper. In the quiet hour before closing, he wheeled his cart past the glass again. Elena stood inside with a children's book open but unread. Her lips moved without words. Sophie tracked nothing and everything. The lamp cast a soft oval. Martin slowed, set the mop upright, and, with a movement so smooth it could have been the shift of a sleeve, let his inspection light breathe a small, honey curve across the floor. Sophie inhaled. Her head turned a hair's breadth. The pen light winked out, back into the cuff, gone. Elena's eyes flicked. Had she seen the glow, or only felt the air change? Can I help you? She asked, without looking at him. Just making sure the finish cures evenly, he answered. It was true enough to stand in court. She closed the book, set it down, and for the first time didn't tell him to leave. She just said, softer than she meant to, she used to love yellow. He should have stopped. Every instinct he had left told him there's a point at which the best thing you can do for a truth is step back and let it reveal itself. But truths that have been smothered don't always know how to breathe alone. He waited until Friday, until the building exhaled its weekly fatigue and the cameras fell into their lazy loops. He set the overhead off and left the warm lamp. Nothing illegal, nothing even unusual. Then, in that pool of gentleness, he gave the light a path. The amber line slid like a quiet question. Sophie blinked, turn not a reflex now, but a choice. Her lips shaped something. Martin didn't dare move. A breath, a tremor, low. The syllable landed like a fragile bird on a windowsill. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, Elena was in the doorway, hair unarmored by perfection, gaze keyed high. She took in the lamp, the empty overheads, the tidiness of a scene that wasn't quite innocent, and the parent in her roared later than the executive, but louder. What are you doing? There are answers a man like Martin can give: procedural, technical, the vocabulary of people who don't want to admit they're afraid. He didn't use any. Listening, he said. Elena stepped forward, not to him, to the lamp, to the line of light that was already fading. Sophie, stunned by the intrusion, retreated behind the fox and went still so completely the room felt colder. You're done, Elena said, each word clipped not to cut him but to cauterize herself. She reached for the wall plate, thumb hovering over the main switch that would flood the room sterile and safe and empty again. Martin didn't move toward her. He just lowered his eyes to the floor, to the place where the light had been, to the scuff he'd pretend to buff later if anyone asked. If you turn it on, he said quietly, she disappears. Not her body, her trying. Elena's mouth tightened, the way mouths do when a truth lands, and the first defense is anger. You don't get to tell me what helps my child, she said, and hit the switch. White light swallowed the amber. Sophie froze, a small animal painting itself into the landscape. Somewhere in the corridor, the friendly guard's radio chirped. Martin's badge buzzed red in his pocket, deactivated mid-shift, tidy, efficient. He reached for the cart handle without looking at Elena. I'll go, he said, and he meant it. He took one step, then another, and on the third, the smallest sound reached up from the rug like a hand from water. Sophie's voice, unused, unsteady, but alive, threaded the cold air with a single, aching word that didn't belong to anyone but her. Mama. Elena's fingers slipped off the switch as if it had burned her. The corridor radio crackled again, closer now. Martin didn't turn around. He didn't have to. He knew the next seconds would decide everything. The radio static outside grew sharper, footsteps closing in, and still the silence between Elena and Sophie was heavier than the security presence in the hall. Elena stood motionless, her palm still hovering near the wall switch as though the plastic had suddenly turned molten. The word hung in the air Mama. Small, shaky, but undeniable. Sophie had not spoken in years, and now, in front of a man she had tried to dismiss as invisible, her daughter's voice had reached her again. Elena's lips parted, but no sound came. Martin felt the instinct to step forward, to shield the moment, but he knew the weight of mothers and daughters wasn't his to intrude upon. The door swung open, 2 guards entering briskly, their practiced calm already scanning for threat. "Problem here?" one asked, eyes on Martin. Elena finally blinked, drew a long breath, and answered flatly, "No problem." He was just leaving. Martin didn't argue. He tightened his grip on the mop handle, nodded once, and walked out with the kind of steady step a man uses when he knows retreat is not defeat, only delay. They marched him down to a lower office, one meant for small reprimands that wouldn't leave paperwork. The guards leaned on walls, not chairs, projecting ease that was anything but. A supervisor slid a paper across the desk, termination effective immediately, badge already nullified. No cause stated there didn't need to be. "You want to contest? Talk to HR," the supervisor said, tone suggesting HR would file his name under forgotten within the week. Martin read the page once, then folded it carefully and slid it into his jacket. He wasn't shocked. When you shine light where someone insists there is none, consequences arrive faster than thank yous. He left without a word. The night air outside colder than he remembered, a drizzle painting the street lamps into blurred halos. He should have felt defeated, but instead he felt his notebook's weight in his pocket, a ledger of patterns, blinks, whispers, and one undeniable word: yellow. It wasn't proof yet, but it was more than silence, and silence had been the real prison all along. At home, the small apartment smelled of coffee gone stale and the faint wax of a candle burned too often. On the table lay the framed photo of Maya, his late daughter, smiling with that same half-squint Sophie had given the light. Martin lit the candle, the flame catching like a tiny witness, and opened his notebook. He added a new entry with deliberate strokes. Friday, 9:48 p.m., subject vocalized Mama, independent of suggestion. He underlined it twice, then wrote one word beneath it: hope. For a long time he sat there, staring at the page, wondering if his obsession was compassion or punishment for what he had lost. But when he closed his eyes, he heard Sophie's small voice again, not ghostly but alive, reaching, trying. That was enough. He blew out the candle and whispered into the dark, "Help me not waste this." Elena didn't sleep. She stood at the window of her immaculate office, city lights mirrored against glass, and replayed the moment again and again. Her daughter's voice, thin, trembling, had broken through years of professional assurances that there would be no breakthrough. Doctors, specialists, therapists all had spoken with such finality that believing otherwise had felt like denial. And yet, there it was. Mama, a word too raw to be manufactured, too personal to be coincidence. She poured herself a drink, untouched as she set it on the desk, and opened a folder she hadn't looked at in years. Sophie's full medical records. Prescription notes, dosage schedules, specialist signatures, all in neat rows that now looked less like care and more like chains. She noticed something she had ignored before: the eye drops. Continuous, unadjusted, renewed year after year by the same hand. She traced the doctor's name with her fingertip, felt anger stir under her ribs, and for the first time questioned whether she had been complicit in blinding her own child. The thought twisted like a knife. She snapped the folder shut, unable to face the conclusion just yet. But the question had been asked, and questions have a way of multiplying when the night is too quiet. 2 days later, Martin received a knock on his apartment door that didn't match the rhythm of bill collectors or neighbors. When he opened it, Elena Hart stood there, her perfection dimmed by shadows under her eyes. In her hand, she held something small, plush, and worn. The fox. Sophie's fox. Martin froze, heart kicking hard against his chest. She spoke again. Elena said, voice low, almost disbelieving. "Last night." She said it to me this time. Martin swallowed, unsure whether to answer or let silence stretch. Elena's composure cracked for a moment, grief and wonder mingling in her face. "I don't know what you did," she admitted, "but I need to understand." For her. Martin stepped aside slowly, letting her in, his notebook still open on the table with words that seemed to glow in the lamplight. Elena's eyes fell on it, on the lines of observation written in a hand too steady to belong to a desperate man. Her breath caught when she saw the words circled again and again, not blind. And in that instant, both of them knew the fragile miracle they had touched was now tangled with something far darker, something that would not let them walk away unscathed. Elena's fingers trembled as she touched the edge of Martin's notebook, though she didn't dare flip a page. She had built her empire on reports, metrics, quarterly graphs, facts neatly delivered in sanitized fonts. Yet this book, written in a janitor's pen, shook her more than any boardroom ambush. "You saw it before I did," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. Martin didn't answer immediately. He stood by the window, arms folded, as if bracing against memories only he could see. "I didn't see her," he said finally. "I saw a light reaching her." "That's different." Elena exhaled, long and uneven. "For years they told me she was sealed off, a window painted shut. But what if it wasn't her at all? What if it was us?" The question tasted bitter in her mouth. She had paid for every treatment, every specialist, every trial. Had her money built a cage instead of a cure? Martin turned then, his gaze cutting sharp. "Those drops," he said, nodding toward the memory of her folder. "How often?" Elena's eyes flickered. "Twice a day, since birth. Prescribed by Dr. Marlowe himself. He said they reduced inflammation, prevented nerve damage." Martin shook his head slowly, a grim recognition clouding his face. "Or they suppressed her. I've seen drugs used that way, masking a symptom by numbing the very thing that fights." Elena's throat tightened. "You're suggesting—" Her voice faltered, unwilling to finish the sentence. "That she was never blind at all? That someone kept her that way?" The words crashed between them like breaking glass. For a moment neither spoke, as if acknowledging it out loud had invited danger into the room. Outside, a car passed, its headlights sweeping a pale arc across the curtains. Sophie's whispered yellow echoed in both their minds, louder than any city noise. The following morning, Martin prepared a plan the way soldiers prepare for missions, quietly, methodically, with no illusions about safety. He acquired a sterile vial, a padded envelope, gloves, everything needed to pull a small sample without leaving fingerprints. Elena watched, arms folded, her usual command muted by unease. "Do you understand what this means?" she asked. "If we're wrong, then I'll take the fall," Martin interrupted, sealing the envelope. "They already fired me. What more can they take?" His eyes softened, just slightly. "But if we're right, they took her sight." Elena looked away, jaw set, torn between the CEO who weighed risks and the mother who no longer cared about consequences. Finally she nodded, barely perceptible, and whispered, "Do it." Martin slipped the envelope into the outgoing courier bin, his heart pounding as though he had just smuggled truth itself into enemy hands. As the chute swallowed the package, he knew there was no turning back. Somewhere in a lab, the real story would either prove him a fool or expose a crime built on silence. Days crawled by, each one a battlefield of patience. Elena filled them with board meetings, her face unreadable as ever, but Martin could see the tension in her knuckles, in the way she tapped the edge of her pen when reports droned on. At night, she lingered by Sophie's room, watching her daughter draw crude suns in yellow crayon, each circle less clumsy than the last. Martin, allowed back under the title of consultant, sat quietly in the background, his notebook swelling with observations. He tested gently, never direct, a rolling ball that caught sunlight, a reflective strip angled across the rug, the subtle flicker of a penlight hidden in his sleeve. Each time Sophie responded not dramatically, not enough to announce to the world, but enough to carve doubt into stone. Her eyes followed, her fingers reached, and once she whispered, "Blue," when Elena walked in wearing a navy dress. Elena froze, tears threatening, but she swallowed them down. CEOs do not weep in front of witnesses. Mothers, however, nearly do. On the fourth day, Martin's phone buzzed with a single message from his contact at the lab. "Call me now." He excused himself, stepping into a deserted stairwell, and dialed with hands he forced to stay steady. The technician's voice was low, urgent. "It's not just saline. The drops are loaded with cyclopentolate. Stronger than anything I've seen used in routine exams. Daily use over years. It suppresses reflex permanently. blinds the brain to what the eyes can still do. Martin closed his eyes, fury and sorrow crashing through him. So she could have seen, he murmured. All this time, the line went silent, heavy with the weight of truth. Be careful, the technician warned finally. If this gets out, it won't just be malpractice, it'll be scandal. Martin hung up, his jaw locked tight, and for a long moment he simply stood there in the stairwell, gripping the phone so hard it creaked. He had proof now, but proof could be more dangerous than lies if you weren't ready to wield it. Above him, muffled laughter echoed from Sophie's room. The sound was fragile, fleeting, and Martin swore he would protect it, no matter what storm was about to break. The lab results arrived in a plain envelope, but the truth inside weighed like iron. Elena sat at the edge of her office desk, fingers tight around the pages. Words like cyclopentolate and pupil suppression stared back at her in clinical detachment, but to her they translated into something far more brutal: years of stolen sight. Martin stood near the window, arms crossed, watching her face pale. This wasn't medicine, she whispered, almost choking on the word. It was control. Martin's voice was low, measured. They called it therapy, but they weren't treating her, they were keeping her in the dark. Elena's breath hitched. She felt every dollar she had poured into specialists, every board decision she had signed, twisting into knives. I gave them power, she said, voice trembling, and they used it to blind my daughter. Martin's reply was steady, almost harsh. Then you take it back, before they bury her future the way they buried the truth. That night, she walked the halls of her home like a restless ghost, the sound of Sophie's soft humming drifting from the nursery. She paused at the doorway, watching her daughter draw crooked suns in yellow crayon, each circle more defined than the last. The fox lay by her side, its fabric worn thin by years of silent companionship. Elena's throat tightened as Sophie whispered, "Blue," glancing at her mother's dress. The word was shaky, but it landed. Elena pressed her knuckles to her lips, fighting tears. Behind her, Martin's reflection appeared in the window glass, his notebook in hand. He didn't say anything, but the faint nod he gave carried more than words. She's seeing more than they ever let her. Elena stepped into the room, knelt beside her daughter, and for the first time in years allowed hope to settle in her chest, not as fantasy, but as fragile, defiant reality. The board of directors was less forgiving. In the glass conference room the next morning, Crane's voice cut like wire. "You're jeopardizing 10 years of contracts because of one child's anomaly. This is business, not personal." Elena's reply was frost. "It became personal the moment they used my daughter as collateral." Another board member leaned forward, eyes sharp. "If you go public, you'll tank this company. You'll destroy everything your husband built." The mention of him was a dagger. Elena's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. "Better I destroy it telling the truth than let it thrive on lies." Crane smirked. "Then you won't survive the fallout. Investors will gut you." Silence followed, thick with challenge. Martin, mopping a scuff that wasn't there outside the half-closed door, heard every word. He knew then it wasn't just about Sophie's sight anymore. It was about power, money, and people willing to blind children for both. Later, in the quiet of her office, Elena found Martin waiting. He didn't bother with preamble. "They want you out," he said. "If you stay silent, they'll keep Sophie buried in shadows. If you fight, they'll tear you apart." Elena leaned against her desk, exhaustion pulling at her shoulders, but there was fire in her eyes. "So what do I do?" Martin stepped closer, voice low but fierce. "You make noise. You show the world what they've done before they rewrite the story. Truth is louder than boardrooms if you let it breathe." Elena looked down at Sophie's newest drawing pinned on her wall, 3 figures under a bright yellow sun, one heart between them. She touched the paper with trembling fingers and whispered, "Then we start tomorrow." Martin nodded once, his jaw set. For the first time, the two of them were no longer janitor and CEO, but allies standing on the edge of a war they could not avoid. That night, Sophie curled between them on the rug, her crayons scattered, her laughter fragile but alive. She pressed the fox into Martin's hands and whispered, "Light," pointing at the lamp. Elena's eyes glistened as she met his gaze. The world outside was already sharpening its knives, but in this moment, in this small circle of warmth, they had something the board and the doctors and the contracts could never manufacture. Truth, simple and undeniable. Martin leaned closer to Sophie and said softly, "Keep drawing, little one. The world needs to see what you see." Sophie giggled, scribbling another circle of yellow, brighter than before. Elena whispered into the stillness, more to herself than anyone. "Then tomorrow we burn their lies down." And as the lamp glowed steady, Martin knew tomorrow would be the most dangerous day yet. The press conference was never supposed to happen not this soon. Not without the blessing of shareholders or lawyers, but Elena knew waiting meant burial. That morning she walked into the hall not as a CEO clad in armor, but as a mother stripped bare of excuses. Behind her, the backdrop wasn't a corporate logo or a glossy slogan, but Sophie's drawing enlarged on canvas. 3 figures under a golden sun, a red heart between them. Cameras clicked, the hum of anticipation like static before a storm. "I am not here to defend profits," Elena began, voice steady but raw. "I am here to defend the truth. For years, my daughter was prescribed a treatment that did not heal her. It suppressed her sight, it silenced her world, and I trusted those who said it was care." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, reporters leaning forward. She held up the lab report with a hand that didn't tremble. "Independent analysis confirms what I cannot unsee. These drugs blinded children in the name of research. My child among them. That ends today." In the back row, Martin stood with his cap low, deliberately invisible. He didn't want the spotlight. He wanted Sophie's laughter, her whispers of color, her drawings of suns. Still, hearing Elena speak his unspoken rage felt like watching a locked gate splinter. The reporters pressed harder questions of liability, of lawsuits, of corporate collapse. Elena didn't flinch. "If you want to call this the ruin of Stone Innovations, so be it. I call it its rebirth. We will cooperate with federal authorities, fund independent investigations, and most importantly listen to the voices we silenced." She paused, eyes lifting from the paper to the crowd. "One of those voices belongs to my daughter. Yesterday, for the first time in years, she looked at me and said, 'Mama.' I will not let anyone take that light away again." The silence that followed wasn't the polished hush of boardrooms. It was reverence, the kind people hold when something fragile but sacred is unfolding. By evening, headlines flooded every screen. CEO exposes child suppression scandal. Whistleblower janitor sparks medical reform. Grace Hart's recovery changes everything. Investors panicked, rivals circled, but none of it mattered to Martin when he walked into Sophie's room that night. She was curled under her blanket, the fox tucked under one arm, a yellow crayon in the other. On the page was a sun, brighter and rounder than before, with 2 stick figures beside it. "That's you," she told Martin, pointing with a proud smile. "And Mama, we're standing in the light." Martin's throat tightened. He crouched down, brushed her hair back, and whispered, "You did this, Sophie. You brought us here." She giggled, pressing the fox to her face, her eyes sparkling with something no doctor's file had ever accounted for: hope alive and unashamed. Elena joined them, kneeling on the other side of the bed, exhaustion etched into her features but softened by relief. "Do you see us, sweetheart?" she asked gently. Sophie nodded, her small hand stretching to grasp both theirs at once. "I see you. I see yellow. And I see love." The words were halting, imperfect, but they landed like a hymn in that room. Martin blinked hard, looking away for a moment, because in Sophie's voice he heard an echo Maya's memory, not haunting this time, but healing. Elena squeezed her daughter's hand, tears breaking freely now, and whispered, "Then that's all we need." They sat there in silence, 3 figures under the soft glow of a bedside lamp. No titles, no battles, just a mother, a child, and the man who refused to look away when everyone else did. The world outside was ruthless. Investigations sharpened, lawsuits loomed, enemies plotted. But inside that small room, light cut through the shadows, simple and stubborn. Martin knew the war wasn't over. They would come after Elena, after him, after anyone who dared to expose the lie. But Sophie's voice had already broken the silence, and once truth has spoken, it cannot be unspoken. As the lamp glowed warm, she whispered one last time before sleep pulled her under. "It's not just yellow. It's life." Martin met Elena's eyes across the bed. They both knew the road ahead would be brutal, but in that moment, none of it mattered. Because Sophie could see, and sometimes, that single miracle was enough to move mountains.